The wedding hall was glowing with wealth and celebration when the doors slowly opened. A woman stepped inside unnoticed, at first her dress simple, her face calm, but her arms held two newborn babies, wrapped in plain white cloth. As she moved forward, the music faltered. Conversations died mid-sentence. Then the babies cried. On the altar, Ismaila Tanko froze. His smile drained from his face as if the blood had left him all at once. The bride beside him tightened her grip on his hand, confused, afraid. The woman lifted her eyes. They met his. She was the wife he had cast away for being barren. She did not come to beg. She came carrying the truth he thought would never breathe. Before we continue, what country are you watching from and what time is it there right now? Let us know in the comments. And if you believe stories of pain, justice, and healing deserve to be told, remember to subscribe to the channel. Adaeze Chukwu first met Ismaila Tanko on an ordinary afternoon that neither of them expected to remember for the rest of their lives. It was outside a small logistics office on the edge of Abuja, where Adaeze worked as an administrative assistant, and Ismaila was a junior operations supervisor, still trying to prove himself. She had been sent downstairs to deliver documents that were urgently needed. He was pacing, frustrated, arguing on the phone with a driver who had missed a delivery window. When he turned and nearly collided with her, the papers in her hands slipped and scattered across the concrete floor. Adaeze dropped to her knees at once, apologizing, even though it wasn't her fault. Ismaila followed, embarrassed, helping her gather the documents. In that brief, awkward moment, something softened between them. She smiled shyly. He laughed, relieved. It was simple, human, unremarkable, except that neither of them forgot it. Their friendship grew quietly. Ismaila admired Adaeze's steadiness. She was not loud or flashy, but she listened with attention that made people feel seen. Adaeze noticed Ismaila's ambition and the way he spoke about responsibility. Not just success, but being useful, being respected. They talked during lunch breaks, shared small jokes, complained about long hours and low pay. Slowly, affection replaced familiarity. By the time Ismaila proposed, neither of them had much. No car of their own, no family house waiting, just hope and determination. Adaeze said yes without hesitation. Their wedding was modest, held in a small community hall with borrowed chairs and borrowed decorations. Adaeze wore a simple cream dress sewn by a local tailor. Ismaila's suit was rented and slightly too large at the shoulders. But they were happy. People who attended later said it was one of the most sincere weddings they had seen. No excess. No show, just two people committing themselves fully to each other. Adaeze moved into Ismaila's family house shortly after. It was expected, as a household tradition carried weight, and Adaeze respected that. She woke early, learned the rhythms of the home, cooked, cleaned, greeted elders properly. At first, Hajiya Zainab Tanko, Ismaila's mother, treated her with polite warmth. She praised Adaeze's manners, her quiet nature, her willingness to learn. Adaeze took pride in doing things right. The first few months of marriage passed gently. Ismaila was promoted at work. Adaeze managed the household with care and still kept her job, contributing what she could. In the evenings, they sat together and talked about the future, saving for a better apartment, maybe starting a small business someday. And always hovering in the background, the idea of children. They spoke of it with smiles, not pressure. At least not yet. After the first year, the questions began. At first they were soft, casual. So Adaeze and Aunt asked one afternoon, stirring tea. Slowly, any good news yet? Adaeze laughed it off, saying, in God's time. People nodded, smiled, moved on. But the questions did not stop. They multiplied. By the second year, the tone changed. Neighbors whispered. Family members exchanged knowing looks. At gatherings, conversations paused when Adaeze entered, then resumed in lower voices. She noticed even when she pretended not to. Ismaila noticed too, but said little. Hajiya Zainab grew quieter around her. Where she once corrected Adaeze gently, She now sighed often, shaking her head as if burdened by an invisible worry. Sometimes she spoke loudly enough for Adais to hear. A home without children, she would say, is like a tree without fruit. Adais swallowed these words in silence. She prayed, she fasted, she reassured herself that every marriage had its own timing. When she suggested visiting a clinic, Ismaila agreed at first, then delayed. There was always work, always stress, always later. Adais went alone. The first tests were basic, nothing alarming. The doctor advised patience and further observation. Adais returned home, relieved, hopeful. She shared the news with Ismaila, expecting comfort. He nodded, distracted, already thinking about something else. As months passed, the pressure became heavier. Alhaji Musa Tanko, Ismaila's influential uncle, began to visit more often. He spoke openly about lineage, about the importance of sons, about reputation in the community. He never addressed Adais directly. He didn't need to. His words hovered in the air like smoke. Ismaila started coming home later. He avoided conversations about children. When Adais gently suggested he should also get tested, he bristled. "Why are you pushing this?" he asked one evening, irritation sharp in his voice. "You're the one they're talking about." The words cut deeper than he realized. Adais said nothing. She simply nodded and turned away, hiding the hurt that flooded her chest. That night she cried quietly into her pillow so no one would hear. Still she tried harder. She cooked better meals. She greeted Hajia Zainab with extra respect. She prayed louder, longer. She believed that love, patience, and goodness would be enough. But slowly, unmistakably, the warmth in the Tanko household cooled around her. Meals became quieter, invitations fewer, smiles rarer. One afternoon, as Adais passed through the sitting room, she overheard Hajia Zainab speaking to a neighbor. "A woman's true value," the older woman said firmly, "is proven by the children she brings into a home." Adais paused behind the doorway unseen. Her hands trembled. She felt something shift inside her, not anger yet, but fear. A deep, settling fear that the ground beneath her marriage was no longer stable. That evening, as she watched Ismaila scroll through his phone in silence, Adais realized with growing dread that the problem was no longer time. It was blame, and she was already carrying it alone. By the third year of Adais, Chukwu's marriage, the word Barren no longer needed to be spoken aloud. It lived in the pauses between conversations, in the sideways glances from relatives, in the sudden silences that followed her footsteps through the house. It clung to her like a shadow. She could not shake even on days when she tried to convince herself that nothing had changed. At family gatherings, women who once sat beside her now shifted their chairs slightly away. Younger wives whispered among themselves, casting looks filled with curiosity and quiet judgment. Adais learned to keep her head lowered, her smile polite, her presence small. She became careful with her words, afraid that any wrong tone might be interpreted as bitterness. Hajia Zainab Tanko no longer pretended to hide her disappointment. Where she once praised Adais's cooking, she now found faults. The soup was too salty, the rice too dry, the house not quiet enough. Adais accepted each criticism without protest, hoping that humility might soften her mother-in-law's heart. But humility did not stop the whispers. 3 years, an aunt murmured one afternoon, not bothering to lower her voice. And still nothing. Adais heard it. She always did. She returned to the clinic on her own, sitting in crowded waiting rooms with women who held swollen bellies and tired smiles. Each visit brought a mixture of dread and hope. She followed instructions, carefully changed her diet, took prescribed supplements, prayed over every result. The doctors found no clear cause for concern. Sometimes one said gently, "It simply takes time." Time, however, was a luxury Adais no longer seemed to have. When she suggested again that Ismaila Tanko accompany her for testing, his reaction was sharper than before. "Why are you insisting on this?" he asked, his voice rising as they stood in their small bedroom. "Do you want people to think something is wrong with me?" Adayez stared at him, stunned. "It's not about blame," she said softly. "It's about understanding." Ismaila turned away, frustration etched across his face. "You don't understand how this looks," he replied. "In my family, they will never accept that." That was the first time Adayez truly felt alone inside her marriage. From then on, Ismaila withdrew. He spent more time at work, returned home late, spoke little. When Adayez tried to share her fears, he brushed them aside with tired impatience. She sensed that he too was carrying a burden, but instead of standing beside her under its weight, he was slowly placing it on her shoulders alone. Alhaji Musa Tanko became a regular presence in the house. His voice was calm, measured, but his words were heavy with implication. He spoke of tradition, of lineage of men who lost respect because they stayed in unfruitful marriages. He spoke as if Adayez were not there. Ismaila listened. Adayez watched. One evening, as rain hammered against the roof, Adayez overheard a conversation that would linger in her mind, long after the words faded. She stood in the hallway unseen as Alhaji Musa spoke quietly to Ismaila. "A man must think of his future," the uncle said. "You are still young. You should not let sentiment destroy your destiny." Adayez's heart pounded. She waited for Ismaila to defend her, to speak her name, to say something, anything. He said nothing. That silence was louder than any insult she had endured. The next morning, Adayez woke early as always and prepared breakfast. She moved through the kitchen like a ghost, her thoughts heavy, her chest tight. Hajia Zainab entered, watched her for a moment, then spoke. "You should be praying harder," she said bluntly. "Some women are tested, others are simply not meant to stay." Adayez froze her hands, gripping the edge of the counter. She wanted to ask what she had done wrong. She wanted to scream that she was trying, that she had always tried. But the words remained trapped inside her throat. Instead, she nodded. From that day, the blame became open. Relatives no longer bothered with politeness. Neighbors offered unsolicited advice, herbs, prayers, and accusations disguised as concern. Adayez learned to smile through it all, her dignity the last thing she had left. Ismaila's behavior shifted further. He stopped accompanying her to social events. He avoided being seen with her in public. When people asked questions, he responded vaguely, his eyes sliding away from hers. Adayez began to feel like a problem he wished would disappear. One night, unable to sleep, she searched through Ismaila's phone while he showered. She did not intend to invade his privacy. She only wanted reassurance. What she found instead unsettled her. Deeply, messages from relatives discussing introductions, suggestions, names of good girls from respectable families. No explicit plans, but enough to confirm her fears. Her hands trembled as she put the phone back. When she confronted Ismaila, carefully choosing her words with the same caution she used in everything, now he denied nothing and defended everything. "They're just talking," he said flatly. "You're being paranoid." Adayez realized then that the marriage she was fighting for was no longer being defended by both sides. The final blow came at a family gathering weeks later. As elders sat together discussing community matters, Hajia Zainab stood and addressed the room. "We must be honest with ourselves," she said, her voice steady. "A woman who cannot bear children must not waste a man's future." The room fell silent. Adayez felt the words land like stones against her chest. She looked at Ismaila, searching his face for resistance, for anger, for shame. He lowered his eyes. In that moment, Adayez understood something painful and irreversible. The problem was no longer medical. It was no longer even cultural. It was that the man who once loved her was choosing comfort over courage. and she was standing alone in a courtroom where her body was the accused, her silence the evidence, and her marriage already halfway condemned. The shift in Ismaila Tanko did not happen overnight. It arrived quietly, disguised as exhaustion, obligation, and duty. Adayez noticed it first in the small things, the way he no longer asked about her day, the way his laughter seemed reserved for phone calls he took outside the house, the way he flinched when conversations turned toward family expectations. Alhaji Musa Tanko's influence grew stronger with each passing week. He visited often, always at convenient hours, always when Adayez was present but never addressed. His words were careful, wrapped in cultural logic and concern for Ismaila's future. He spoke of men who had waited too long and paid the price, of families whose names faded because no sons carried them forward, of women who were good, respectable, and most importantly, proven. Adayez listened from the edges of rooms, her heart tightening each time. She waited for Ismaila to push back, to remind his uncle that she was his wife, not a problem to be solved. Instead, Ismaila nodded, asked questions, listened. The first time Safia Bello's name was mentioned, it slipped into conversation like an accident. "She's the daughter of a good family," Hajiya Zainab said one afternoon, stirring her tea. Educated, calm, very respectful. Adayez looked up, startled. "Who?" she asked softly. Hajiya Zainab waved a dismissive hand. "Just someone people talk about." Ismaila did not meet Adayez's eyes. From that moment on, the house felt different. Conversations paused when Adayez entered. Phones were silenced quickly. Ismaila became guarded, his answers shorter, his patience thinner. When Adayez asked if something was wrong, he accused her of imagining things. "You're already stressed," he said. "Don't create problems where there are none." But Adayez felt it in her bones. Something was being planned without her. One evening, Ismaila returned home, later than usual, his shirt smelling faintly of unfamiliar perfume. Adayez said nothing, though the scent lingered in the air between them. She had learned that questions only led to arguments, and arguments only confirmed her powerlessness. Instead, she watched, she listened, she waited. The confirmation came by accident. While cleaning the sitting room, Adayez found a folded piece of paper tucked between old files on a shelf Ismaila rarely used. She hesitated before opening it, guilt rising in her chest, but instinct won. The paper listed names, dates, and a venue. Nothing explicit yet unmistakable. A meeting with elders, a discussion about marriage arrangements. Her hands shook as she read. That night Adayez did not sleep. She lay beside Ismaila, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the past year. Every silence, every unanswered question. Every time she had been made to feel small for asking to be seen. In the days that followed, Ismaila grew colder. He stopped eating meals she prepared, claiming work stress. He avoided physical closeness, sleeping on the edge of the bed, his body turned away from hers. When Adayez tried to talk, he shut down completely. "I can't do this right now," he snapped once. "Everything is pressure." She wanted to ask if she was included in that everything. She didn't. Safia Bello entered Ismaila's life with the ease of someone invited. She was introduced first to the family, not as a replacement but as a possibility. A friend, a visitor, a woman who happened to be present at gatherings Adayez was excluded from. Adayez heard about her through whispers, through neighbors, through the sudden pride in Hajiya Zainab's voice when she spoke about young women who knew their place. Safia was everything Adayez was not allowed to be. Any more visible, celebrated, unquestioned. The final conversation came unexpectedly, without ceremony or warning. Ismaila called Adayez into their bedroom one evening. His face set in an expression she had never seen before. Resolved, distant, rehearsed. Hajiya Zainab sat in the living room pretending not to listen. Alhaji Musa waited outside. "We need to talk," Ismaila said. Adayez sat across from him, her heart pounding. "This marriage, he continued slowly, has brought us both stress. Adais waited. I've tried, he said, though she could not remember the last time he had tried anything with her. But my family will never accept this situation. This situation? Adais asked quietly. He sighed as if burdened by her presence. You know what I mean. The words came next, sharp and final. He spoke of destiny, of cultural responsibility, of how a woman who could not bear children should not hold a man hostage. He spoke as though repeating lines fed to him, his eyes avoiding hers. Adais felt the room spin. So this is it, she said. After everything, Ismaila said nothing. Hajia Zainab entered, then her face hard, her voice firm. It is best you leave with dignity, she said. Dragging this will only bring shame. Adais looked from mother to son, searching for mercy. She found none. She packed that night. No argument, no tears in front of them. Just a small bag, filled with clothes and memories she would never reclaim. As she stepped outside the house that had once been her home, Alhaji Musa nodded approvingly, as if order had been restored. Ismaila stood by the door, hands in his pockets, watching her leave. Adais paused, turned back once, and met his eyes. I prayed for you, she said softly, even when you stopped praying for me. Then she walked away. The door closed behind her with a sound that echoed louder than any scream. Behind that door, plans continued. Meetings were held. Dates were discussed. Safia Bello's name moved from possibility to certainty. And Adais Chukwu stepped into a world that had already judged her guilty without ever hearing her truth. Adais Chukwu did not leave the Tanko household as a woman who had been divorced by paperwork or ceremony. She left as someone quietly erased. By morning, her absence was already being explained in softened language. She had gone to rest, to reflect, to accept reality. No one used the word rejected. No one admitted the truth. She had been pushed out because her body had failed to produce what others demanded. She spent the first night in the corner room of a friend's apartment, lying on a thin mattress with her bag beside her, like proof that she had not imagined everything. Sleep did not come. Each time she closed her eyes, she heard Hajia Zainab's voice, telling her to leave with dignity, as though dignity were something that could be preserved while being discarded. The following days blurred together. Adais moved carefully through the city, avoiding familiar streets, familiar faces. She did not want to answer questions she could barely answer for herself. When people asked how she was, she smiled politely and said she was fine. It was easier than explaining that her life had been split cleanly in two. The formal end came without ceremony. Ismaila Tanko sent word through a relative. There was no face-to-face meeting, no apology, no acknowledgement of shared years. The message was brief and cold. The marriage was over, and Adais was expected to return any remaining items belonging to the Tanko family. Nothing was said about compensation. Nothing about responsibility. Adais sat with the message in her hands for a long time before folding it carefully and placing it back in her bag. It felt unreal that something so final could be delivered so casually. She returned once to the Tanko house to collect the rest of her belongings. Hajia Zainab supervised silently, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Adais packed her clothes under watchful eyes. Items she had brought into the marriage were returned without comment. Gifts received during the marriage were quietly removed from her pile. When Adais reached for a framed photo of her and Ismaila from their wedding day, Hajia Zainab stopped her. That stays, she said flatly. It belongs here. Adais nodded and let go. Outside, neighbors pretended not to stare. Some watched openly, others whispered behind cupped hands. Adais walked with her head high, refusing to cry in front of anyone. Her dignity was the only thing she still owned completely. By the end of the week, the story had spread. People said she had failed as a wife, that she had wasted a good man's time, that Ismaila had been patient for too long. The fact that Adaisi had endured years of pressure in silence did not matter. Society rarely waited for full truths. Ismaila's engagement to Safia Bello was announced shortly after. Adaisi heard about it from a woman at the market, spoken with excitement and approval. At last, the woman said, "A proper wife, a fresh start." The words struck like a slap. Adaisi returned to her room and sat on the floor, her back against the wall, her breath shallow. She did not scream. She did not cry immediately. Instead, she felt a numbness spread through her chest, dull and heavy. It was the kind of pain that came from being replaced so completely that your absence became a relief. That night, the tears finally came. They came without restraint, without shame. Adaisi wept for the woman she had been, the hopeful bride who believed love would protect her. She wept for the years she had spent trying to earn a place she had never been allowed to keep. She wept for the silence she had mistaken for patience. In the days that followed, survival became her only goal. She searched for work wherever she could, taking short-term jobs that barely paid enough to cover rent and food. Some employers asked questions about her marital status. When she answered honestly, the interest faded. When she lied, guilt followed her home. Either way, doors closed. She downsized again, moving into a smaller room on the outskirts of the city. The walls were thin, the nights were loud, but it was all she could afford. She cooked simple meals and learned to ration her savings carefully. Every coin mattered now. Loneliness settled in like a second skin. Adaisi missed the simple things, the routine of shared meals, the sound of Ismaila's keys at the door, the illusion of belonging. Even pain, she realized, had once come wrapped in familiarity. Now she faced the world alone. The shame followed her everywhere. At church, she noticed how people avoided sitting beside her. At social gatherings, invitations stopped arriving. In a culture that defined a woman by her marriage, Adaisi had become an uncomfortable reminder of failure. Yet beneath the humiliation, something else stirred. A quiet anger. Not the kind that screamed for revenge, but the kind that questioned injustice. Adaisi began to replay conversations she had once dismissed. Ismaila's refusal to get tested, his defensiveness, the way blame had settled on her too easily, too completely, the certainty with which everyone had accepted her guilt. Late at night, she asked herself questions she had never dared to ask before. What if the truth had been buried on purpose? What if her suffering had been convenient for others? These thoughts frightened her. They threatened to unravel everything she had been taught about patience and submission. So she pushed them away and focused on surviving, one day at a time. Meanwhile, Ismaila's life moved forward with alarming ease. Photos circulated online, engagement ceremonies, smiling relatives, congratulatory comments. Safia Bello stood beside him, radiant and admired. The same family that had once called Adaisi a blessing now praised destiny for correcting its mistake. Adaisi avoided looking, but the images found her anyway. One afternoon, as she returned from a long shift, exhausted and hungry, Adaisi collapsed on her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. For the first time since leaving the Tanko house, she allowed herself to speak aloud. "I didn't deserve this," she whispered. The words felt strange, almost forbidden, but once spoken, they refused to disappear. She did not know then that this acknowledgement, small and trembling, was the beginning of something else. Something that would eventually force the truth into the open. Something that would challenge the story written about her without her consent. For now Adaisi remained a woman cast aside, stripped of status and security. But beneath the shame and exhaustion, a quiet resolve was forming, and it would not remain silent forever. Life after the divorce did not soften with time. It hardened. Adaisi Chukwu woke each morning before dawn, not because she had somewhere important to go, but because sleep had become shallow and unreliable. Her small rented room smelled faintly of damp concrete and cooking oil from neighboring apartments. The thin curtains let in the gray light of early morning, revealing the same bare walls, the same suitcase tucked beneath her bed, still half unpacked as if she were afraid to settle into a life she had not chosen. She took whatever work she could find. Some days it was clerical tasks for small offices that paid cash and offered no security. Other days it was cleaning, organizing storage rooms, or assisting market traders who needed an extra pair of hands. She worked quietly, efficiently, grateful for anything that allowed her to survive without asking for pity. Still, the weight of stigma followed her. When co-workers learned she was divorced, conversations shifted. Questions came disguised as concern. What happened? Did you offend his family? Did you try everything? Adaz answered politely, vaguely conserving her energy. Explaining herself felt pointless in a world that had already decided the verdict. Her health began to suffer. The long hours, poor meals, and constant stress drained her strength. She lost weight. Headaches became frequent. Some mornings she felt dizzy, just standing up. She ignored the signs, telling herself she could not afford weakness. Rest was a luxury. Doctors were expenses she could not justify. One afternoon, after hours of standing under the sun at a market stall, the world tilted without warning. Sounds blurred. Her vision darkened at the edges. Adaz tried to steady herself, but her legs gave way. When she opened her eyes, she was lying on a narrow hospital bed. The room was small but clean, filled with the soft hum of medical equipment. A woman stood beside her, checking a chart. She was calm, composed, with kind eyes that missed nothing. "I'm Dr. Abena Owusu," the woman said gently. "You fainted from exhaustion and dehydration. How long have you been feeling unwell?" Adaz tried to sit up, embarrassed. "I'm fine," she insisted weakly. "I just need water." Dr. Abena did not argue. She helped Adazi drink, then sat down beside the bed. "You're not fine," she said quietly, "and pretending you are won't help you." There was something in the doctor's tone, not judgment, not pity, but clarity that broke through Adayez's defenses. Without meaning to, she told her more than she had told anyone in months, about the divorce, the accusations, the endless pressure, the loneliness. Dr. Abena listened without interruption. "Have you ever had a full reproductive assessment?" she asked after a moment. Adazi hesitated. "I've been tested," she replied. "They said nothing was wrong." "With whom?" Dr. Abena asked. "A clinic near my former home," Adazi said. "I went alone." Dr. Abena nodded slowly. "And your husband?" Adazi lowered her eyes. "He never went." The doctor leaned back slightly, her expression thoughtful. "That matters," she said. Over the next few days, Dr. Abena insisted on running comprehensive tests, blood work scans, evaluations Adazi had never been offered before. Adazi protested, at first worried about cost, but the doctor arranged support through the hospital's assistance program. When the results came in, they were clear. Adazi was healthy. More than that, there was no medical reason she could not conceive. Adazi stared at the papers in disbelief. Her hands shook as she held them. "That's not possible," she whispered. "They told me, everyone told me." "They told you what was convenient," Dr. Abena said gently. "Not what was true." The realization hit Adazi with brutal force. The years of blame, the humiliation, the silent acceptance of guilt, all of it had been built on an assumption no one had bothered to challenge except her. A wave of grief surged through her, sharp and overwhelming. She covered her face and cried, not softly, not politely, but with the rawness of someone who had been carrying too much for too long. Dr. Abena placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "You were not Barren," she said. "You were blamed." As the shock settled, anger followed. Not explosive anger, but something colder and steadier. Adazi thought of Ismaila Tanko's refusal to get tested, his defensiveness, the way he had allowed the accusation to stand unchallenged, because it protected him. Could it have been him? Adais asked quietly. Dr. Abena chose her words carefully. I can't say without his tests, she replied. But I can say this: when only one partner is examined, the conclusion is incomplete. Incomplete. The word echoed in Adaise's mind. After her discharge, Adaise had nowhere to go immediately. Her rent was overdue. Her body was still weak. Dr. Abena connected her with a woman she trusted, Mama Nomsa Kumalo, an older South African woman who ran a small boarding house for women in transition. Mama Nomsa welcomed Adaise without questions. Rest first, she said, leading her to a clean room with sunlight pouring through the window. Stories can wait. Under Mama Nomsa's roof, something in Adaise began to mend. She slept properly for the first time in months. She ate regular meals. She spoke when she wanted and stayed silent when she needed to. Mama Nomsa never pushed. She simply provided space and safety. At night, Adaise lay awake thinking about the truth she now carried. It felt heavy, dangerous even. She wondered what would happen if she spoke it aloud, if anyone would listen, if it would change anything. For the first time since her marriage ended, Adaise understood something clearly. Her suffering had not been inevitable. It had been chosen for her. And while she was not yet ready to confront the world with that truth, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would never again accept blame that was not hers. The woman who had collapsed under the weight of silence was gone. In her place stood someone fragile, yes, but awake. And that awakening would change everything. Recovery did not arrive all at once. It unfolded slowly, in small, almost invisible steps that Adaise Chukwu learned to recognize only in hindsight. At Mama Nomsa Kumalo's boarding house, mornings began quietly. The women who stayed there came from different places and carried different stories, but they shared a common understanding. This was a space for rebuilding, not explaining. Mama Nomsa insisted on routine. Breakfast at the same time every day. Chores shared, not assigned. Silence respected. Adaise found comfort in the simplicity. Her body regained strength first. Proper meals, clean water, uninterrupted sleep, things she had taken for granted, before restored her in ways she had not realized she needed. The dizziness faded. The constant fatigue loosened its grip. As her body healed, her mind began to follow. Still, the truth she had learned at the hospital hovered over her thoughts like a storm cloud. She replayed Dr. Abena Owusu's words again and again. You were not Barren. You were blamed. Some days the realization filled her with relief. Other days it crushed her with delayed grief. The injustice of it all felt unbearable. Mama Nomsa noticed. One evening, as Adaise sat alone on the veranda staring into the fading light, Mama Nomsa joined her with 2 cups of tea. She handed one to Adaise without speaking. Truth, Mama Nomsa said after a while, can feel heavier than lies at first. Adaise knotted her throat tight. I don't know what to do with it, she admitted. I carried shame for so long. Now that I know it wasn't mine, I don't know who I am without it. Mama Nomsa smiled gently. You are who you always were, she said, just no longer bent. With time, Adaise began to take small steps back into the world. Mama Nomsa introduced her to a friend who needed help managing records for a small cooperative business. It wasn't glamorous and the pay was modest, but it was steady. Adaise accepted gratefully. The work suited her. It required focus, organization, and patience skills she had sharpened through years of managing a household under scrutiny. Each completed task reminded her that she was competent, capable, useful. These were not traits marriage had given her. They had always been hers. As weeks passed, Adaise's confidence returned cautiously, like a shy animal, testing open ground. She walked with her shoulders a little straighter. She spoke with less hesitation. She even laughed occasionally, surprising herself with the sound. But healing was not linear. There were nights when memories crept in, uninvited. The cold look in Ismaila Tanko's eyes. The finality of the door closing behind her. The ease with which others had erased her. On those nights, Adais felt anger rise hot, sharp, demanding action. What stopped her was fear. She feared that confronting the truth would drag her back into a world she had barely escaped. She feared retaliation, disbelief, further humiliation. Most of all, she feared that speaking out would change nothing, that society would still find a way to blame her. Dr. Abena visited once during those weeks, checking on Adai's recovery. They spoke privately. "You don't owe anyone silence," the doctor said firmly. "But you also don't owe them confrontation before you're ready." Adais appreciated the distinction. She was not weak for waiting. She was choosing her moment. Meanwhile, life in Ismaila's world moved forward loudly. Photos of his engagement to Safia Bello circulated online. Smiling faces, bright colors, blessings from elders. Adais saw them by accident one afternoon when a co-worker scrolled past them casually. She felt the familiar sting, but it did not cut as deeply as before. Instead, something unexpected surfaced: clarity. Safia's face was radiant, unaware. The comments praised destiny and restoration. No one mentioned the woman who had been pushed aside. Adais realized that if she remained silent forever, her story would not simply be forgotten. It would be replaced. That night she lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her small room, listening to the soft breathing of the house around her. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future not defined by survival alone. What would justice look like? Not revenge, not public humiliation. Adais had no desire to inflict pain, simply to balance the scales. What she wanted was acknowledgement, truth, a correction of the narrative that had reduced her to a failure. She wanted her name returned to her. The next morning, Adais made a decision. Not a dramatic one, but a foundational one. She would not run from the truth. She would prepare. Adais contacted Dr. Abena and requested copies of her medical records. The doctor agreed immediately and explained the documentation carefully. Adais organized the files meticulously, labeling dates, results, conclusions. She did not yet know when or how she would use them, but having them grounded her. At the same time, she focused on building stability. She saved money. She expanded her role at work. She enrolled in a short certification course that improved her employability. Each step was deliberate, each choice an investment in independence. Mama Nomza watched with quiet pride. "You are becoming dangerous," she teased one evening. Adais smiled faintly. "I don't want to be dangerous," she said. "I just don't want to be invisible." As the months passed, Adais felt a subtle shift within herself. The shame that once shaped her decisions no longer dictated them. She no longer measured her worth by others' approval. She began to understand that dignity was not something granted, it was something claimed. And then, quietly, unexpectedly, her body sent her a message she did not recognize at first. It started with fatigue, different from exhaustion, a sensitivity to smells, a strange awareness of her own heartbeat. Adais dismissed it initially, attributing it to stress. But as days passed, the signs became harder to ignore. When she returned to the hospital for confirmation, her hands trembled as she waited for the results. Dr. Abena smiled before she spoke. Adais was pregnant. The news did not explode with joy. It settled slowly, profoundly. Tears filled Adais's eyes, not from triumph, but from the weight of what this meant. Proof, vindication, responsibility. She placed a hand over her stomach, barely breathing. This life growing inside her was not a weapon. It was not evidence to be wielded carelessly. It was fragile, sacred, and it belonged first to her. As she left the hospital that day, Adaz made another decision. She would protect this truth, this life, until she was strong enough to let the world see it. Healing, she realized, was no longer just about surviving what had been done to her. It was about choosing how and when to rise. Adaeze Chukwu carried the news of her pregnancy like a fragile secret pressed close to her chest. It changed the way she moved through the world. Every step became deliberate. Every decision carried new weight. This life growing inside her was not just a miracle. It was responsibility, vulnerability, and truth wrapped together. She did not tell many people. Mama Nomsa Kumalo was the first. Adaeze sat across from her at the small kitchen table. One morning, hands folded, eyes steady but fearful. When she spoke, her voice barely rose above a whisper. "I'm pregnant." Mama Nomsa did not react with surprise or celebration. She reached across the table and took Adaeze's hands, gently holding them as if grounding her. "Then we will protect you," she said simply. That promise meant more than Adaeze could explain. Dr. Abena Owusu laid out the medical realities with calm honesty. Adaeze's body was healthy, but stress could be dangerous. Regular checkups were essential. Rest was not optional. Adaeze listened carefully, absorbing every instruction. She knew too well what neglect could cost. For the first time in years, Adaeze allowed herself to prioritize her own well-being without guilt. She reduced her working hours. Though money was tight, Mama Nomsa insisted they would manage. Adaeze shifted to tasks that could be done sitting down, focusing on record-keeping and coordination, rather than physical labor. At night she read about pregnancy, about nutrition, about childbirth information she had once avoided for fear of heartbreak. Fear did not disappear, it changed shape. She feared being discovered. She feared judgment. She feared that news of her pregnancy would reach the Tanko family before she was ready. But beneath those fears was something stronger resolve. Adaeze decided she would not announce this pregnancy to the world. Not yet. She would not allow it to be dissected by gossip or twisted into proof of someone else's redemption. This life was not a rebuttal to her past, it was the beginning of her future. As weeks passed, her body changed subtly. Clothes fit differently. Fatigue returned gentler but persistent. Adaeze adjusted, learning to listen to herself in ways she never had before. When she needed rest, she rested. When she needed silence, she claimed it. The world outside continued its noise. One afternoon, while organizing files at work, Adaeze overheard a conversation that tightened her chest. Two co-workers were discussing Ismaila Tanko's upcoming wedding to Safia Bello. The tone was celebratory, admiring. "They say the family spared no expense," one said. "It will be a big event." Adaeze kept her eyes on her work, her expression neutral. She did not participate. She did not need to. The story was no longer hers to carry. Later that evening, alone in her room, she allowed herself to feel the ache that followed. It was not jealousy. It was grief for the years lost, for the life she had imagined, for the ease with which her absence had been accepted. She placed a hand on her stomach and breathed slowly until the feeling passed. Weeks later, a routine appointment revealed something unexpected. Dr. Abena studied the scan carefully, then smiled in a way that made Adaeze's heart race. "There's more than one heartbeat," she said. Adaeze froze. "What twins?" the doctor confirmed. "You're carrying twins." The room seemed to tilt. Adaeze laughed once, breathless, then covered her mouth as tears spilled down her cheeks. Twins. The word felt unreal, overwhelming, beautiful. As joy surged, fear followed quickly behind. 2 lives meant double the responsibility, double the risk, double the attention if discovered. Adaeze's mind raced with questions she did not yet have answers to. Mama Nomsa received the news with quiet awe. "Life has a way of restoring what was denied," she said. "But restoration requires wisdom." Adaeze understood. She began planning more carefully. She saved, aggressively cutting unnecessary expenses. She documented everything: medical records, appointment notes, test results, or organizing them with precision. The files were no longer just information. They were protection. One afternoon, as Adais walked home from the market, she sensed eyes on her. She turned casually and saw a woman staring, a face she recognized faintly from her former life. Someone connected to the Tanko family. Their eyes met briefly before the woman looked away. Adaise's heart pounded. That night she told Mama Nomza what had happened. They agreed it was time to be cautious. Adaise would avoid familiar neighborhoods. She would change her routines. She would not post anything online. Discretion became her shield. At the same time, she refused to live in constant fear. She continued attending prenatal classes quietly. She built a small circle of support women who respected privacy, who asked before offering advice, who understood that silence could be protective rather than secretive. As her belly grew, Adais wrestled with conflicting emotions: pride and anxiety, gratitude and resentment. She wondered what Ismaila would think if he knew. She wondered how Safia would feel. Then she stopped herself. Their reactions were not her responsibility. Late one night, Adais sat at her small desk reviewing her documents. She paused, staring at the stack of papers that represented the truth she had carried alone for so long. Medical proof, dates, facts that contradicted the narrative that had destroyed her marriage. She imagined different futures, one where she stayed silent forever, raising her children quietly, allowing the world to continue believing a lie. Another where she spoke out recklessly, exposing herself and her children to scrutiny and danger. Neither felt right. What she wanted was balance, timing, control. Adais realized then that the truth was powerful, but only when wielded with intention. She did not need to rush. She needed to be ready. Outside her window, the city hummed with life, unaware of the transformation unfolding quietly within her. Adais rested her hands on her belly and spoke softly, as if the twins could hear her. "I will protect you," she whispered, "and when the time comes, I will stand." For now she would remain unseen. She would grow stronger. She would let her body and spirit prepare for what lay ahead. The world believed her story was finished. It was not. It was only gathering its strength. By the time Adais Chukwu entered her second trimester, secrecy had become a discipline rather than a fear. She no longer trembled at every unfamiliar face or sudden sound. Instead, she observed, calculated, adjusted. Pregnancy taught her patience in a way suffering never had. Each day was measured, not by what she lost, but by what she protected. The twins grew steadily. So did Adais's awareness of the world around her. At prenatal appointments, Dr. Abena Owusu monitored her closely, documenting everything with meticulous care. She explained each development calmly, never rushing Adais's questions. When Adais asked whether stress could harm the babies, the doctor did not minimize the concern. "Peace is not a luxury right now," she said. "It's treatment." Adais took the advice seriously. She limited conversations that drained her. She stopped checking social media entirely. She structured her days around rest, nutrition, and quiet work. Mama Nomsa Humalo noticed the change, not just in Adaise's body, but in her presence. There was a steadiness about her now, a firmness that had replaced the constant apologetic energy she once carried. Meanwhile, news from Ismaila Tanko's world continued to drift toward her, whether she invited it or not. The wedding date was set. Invitations had been printed. Relatives traveled from different cities to prepare. Ismaila's name appeared in community discussions, again praised for starting afresh and doing the right thing at last. Safia Bello was admired openly, her elegance, her family background, her perceived promise of motherhood. Adais heard these things through fragments, overheard conversations, careless remarks, whispers that assumed she was no longer listening. What unsettled her was not the celebration itself, but the certainty with which people spoke as though the past had been erased cleanly, as though her years of endurance had never existed. One afternoon, while attending a small prenatal workshop, Daisy met another woman who recognized her. It happened quietly. A glance held a second too long. A breath caught. Daisy, the woman asked hesitantly. Daisy turned slowly. She knew the face now, Amina, a distant cousin of the Tanko family. Not close enough to matter, but close enough to know stories. Yes, Daisy replied calmly. Amina's eyes dropped instinctively to Daisy's belly. Shock flashed across her face before she could hide it. Amina began, then stopped. I didn't know. You weren't supposed to, Daisy said gently. The silence between them stretched. Amina shifted uncomfortably, clearly torn between curiosity and caution. Ismaila is getting married next month, Amina said finally, as if delivering news rather than stating the obvious. I know, Daisy replied. Amina hesitated, then lowered her voice. People say, they say everything was your fault. That you couldn't, Daisy met her gaze steadily. People say many things, she said. Most of them are wrong, Amina swallowed. Should I tell them? No, Daisy said without hesitation. Not yet. When Amina walked away, Daisy felt a familiar tension return, but this time it did not paralyze her. It clarified something important. The truth was no longer hidden. It was leaking. That evening, Daisy discussed the encounter with Mama Nomza and Dr. Abena. Both women listened carefully. You can't control what others discover, Dr. Abena said, but you can control how prepared you are when they do. That night, Daisy reviewed her documents again. She organized them into a single file: medical reports, timelines, written explanations from Dr. Abena. She included a summary that clearly stated one fact: Daisy Chukwu had never been medically infertile. Holding the file, she felt a strange calm. For the first time, the truth felt less like a burden and more like a boundary. As her pregnancy progressed, Daisy experienced moments of deep vulnerability. Hormones magnified emotions she thought she had already processed. Some nights she dreamed of Ismaila, not as the man who betrayed her, but as the one who had once held her hands and promised partnership. Waking from those dreams left her shaken, unsure whether she missed the man or the idea of him. On those nights she reminded herself of reality. Ismaila had chosen silence over integrity. He had allowed her to be blamed because it was easier than questioning himself. That truth mattered more than nostalgia. A routine scan near the end of the second trimester confirmed what Dr. Abena had suspected: the twins were identical. Healthy, strong. Daisy cried quietly as she watched their heartbeats on the screen. They're fighters, Dr. Abena said softly. Daisy smiled. They learned from me. Outside the hospital, life moved on relentlessly. Preparations for the wedding intensified. Daisy saw banners being printed near a shop she passed daily. She heard musicians practicing at night. Each reminder felt like a ticking clock. The closer the wedding came, the more pressure Daisy felt to decide. Would she remain silent forever? Dr. Abena offered her perspective without pushing. There is no moral obligation to expose anyone, she said, but there is a cost to carrying a lie that harms you. Mama Nomza framed it differently. Justice doesn't always knock loudly, she said. Sometimes it waits until the door is open. Daisy thought often about Safia Bello, a woman stepping into a marriage built on a foundation she did not know was cracked. Daisy did not hate her. In truth, she felt something closer to sorrow. Safia, too, was being used to complete a story that wasn't honest. As the wedding week approached, Daisy received confirmation that changed everything. Dr. Abena had quietly requested comparative data from a previous clinic Ismaila had visited years earlier for an unrelated medical check. The records did not include fertility testing, but they included notes that suggested further evaluation had once been recommended. Evaluation Ismaila had never pursued. The implication was unmistakable. Adais sat with the new information for a long time, her hands resting on her belly, feeling the gentle movements beneath her skin. The truth was no longer just personal. It was systemic. She thought about the countless women like her, blamed, discarded, erased, without evidence, without defense. She thought about the ease with which society accepted a narrative that required no accountability from men. That night, Adès made her decision. She would not interrupt the wedding to cause chaos. She would not scream, accuse, or humiliate. But she would not remain invisible either. She would appear, not as a scandal, but as a fact. The following morning, Adès asked Mama Nomsa to help her choose a simple outfit. Nothing extravagant, nothing confrontational. Something that reflected dignity, not defiance. Mama Nomsa nodded understanding, more than Adès said. Dr. Abena agreed to stand by her when the time came. As Adès packed her bag that night, she placed the document file carefully on top. She added copies, sealed envelopes, and contact information. Everything was prepared. The wedding was 3 days away. Adès lay in bed, listening to the twins shift inside her, and felt an unfamiliar sense of certainty settle over her. She was no longer reacting to injustice. She was stepping toward truth. And when she walked into that wedding hall, she would not be asking for permission to be heard. She would simply be present. The days leading up to the wedding unfolded with an unsettling calm. For Adès Chukwu, calm did not mean peace, it meant vigilance. She adjusted her routines again. Morning walks were replaced with short, deliberate outings at different hours. She avoided crowded places. Mama Nomsa Kumalo insisted that someone accompany her whenever possible, and Adès did not argue. Protection, she had learned, was not weakness. The twins' movements grew stronger, more insistent, as if they sensed the tension that lived beneath her composed exterior. At night, Adès lay on her side, one hand resting over her belly, breathing slowly until her thoughts settled. She spoke to them. Quietly, promises carried on whispers meant only for them. "I won't let anyone hurt you," she said, not with lies, not with silence. Despite her precautions, the past found ways to circle closer. It began with a phone call. The number was unfamiliar but local. Adès hesitated before answering. "Hello," she said. There was a pause. Then a woman's voice, measured, controlled. "Adès Chukwu," the voice said. "This is Hajia Zainab Tanko." Adè's heart skipped, then steadied. She closed her eyes briefly before responding. "Yes," she replied. "What do you want?" The older woman sighed as if burdened by the conversation, rather than responsible for it. "People have been talking," she said. "You have been seen." Adès said nothing. "You should stay where you are," Hajia Zainab continued. "This is not the time to reopen old wounds." Adès's grip tightened around the phone. "Old wounds were never closed," she said calmly. "They were covered." A sharp intake of breath came through the line. "You are being unreasonable," Hajia Zainab snapped. "My son has moved on. You should do the same." "And yet, you called," Adès replied. Silence followed. Finally, Hajia Zainab spoke again, her tone colder. "Whatever you think you're carrying, whatever you think you can prove, keep it to yourself. Do not embarrass this family." The call ended without goodbye. Adès sat still for a long moment, the phone pressed against her ear long after the line went dead. When she finally lowered it, her hands were trembling, not with fear but with clarity. They knew. That evening, Adès told Mama Nomsa and Dr. Abena about the call. Mama Nomsa's jaw tightened. "They are trying to intimidate you," she said, "because they cannot control you anymore." Dr. Abena nodded. "This confirms what we suspected. You must be careful, but it also means the truth is already disrupting their plans." They discussed safety measures calmly, practically. Emergency contacts, transportation, backup plans. Adaze listened, contributing when needed, but her mind remained steady. The threat had not weakened her resolve. It had sharpened it. The next day, another encounter followed this one unexpected. While Adaze waited outside a pharmacy, a man approached her slowly. He was well-dressed, his posture deliberate, his expression neutral. Adaze recognized him immediately, one of Alhaji Musatanko's aides. "I was asked to speak with you," he said quietly. "I'm not interested," Adaze replied. He held up a hand. "Just a message," he said. "Nothing more." Adaze hesitated, then nodded once. "Please, reconsider," the man said. "There is nothing to gain from disrupting the wedding. People will not be kind. You could be blamed again." Adaze met his eyes steadily. "I'm not trying to gain anything," she said. "I'm trying to stop losing." The man studied her for a moment, then nodded slightly. "I've delivered the message," he said, and walked away. That night, sleep eluded Adaze. The weight of impending confrontation pressed against her chest, heavy but familiar. She reviewed her plans, mentally checking each detail, each contingency. There was no room for impulse, only intention. As the wedding day drew closer, signs of pressure multiplied. A distant relative sent a vague message urging peace. A former neighbor hinted that Adaze should protect her future by staying quiet. None addressed the injustice directly. All urged silence. Adaze began to understand something painful and important. They were not afraid she was wrong. They were afraid she was right. 2 days before the wedding, Dr. Abena called Adaze into her office for a final checkup. The twins were strong, but the stress was beginning to show. Blood pressure slightly elevated. Fatigue deeper than before. "You must be honest with yourself," Dr. Abena said. "If at any point this becomes too much, you walk away. No truth is worth your children's safety." Adaze nodded. "I know," she said. "That's why I won't rush. I won't shout. I will simply exist where they hoped I wouldn't." The night before the wedding, Mama Nomza helped Adaze prepare a small bag. Inside were essentials, water, medication, identification, and the document file. Nothing extra, nothing symbolic. Practicality ruled the moment. As they worked, Mama Nomza paused. "Do you ever wish you had fought earlier?" she asked gently. Adaze considered the question carefully. "No," she said finally. "I needed to survive first. Fighting without strength would have destroyed me." Mama Nomza smiled softly. "Then you are ready." On the morning of the wedding, Adaze woke before sunrise. The city buzzed with anticipation, cars honking, vendors shouting music, testing sound systems. Celebration filled the air like perfume. Adaze moved slowly, deliberately. She bathed, dressed and braided her hair simply. No jewelry, no makeup beyond what made her feel like herself. She chose comfort over drama, dignity over spectacle. As she looked at herself in the mirror, she did not see the woman who had been cast out months earlier. She saw someone quieter, stronger, anchored. The twins shifted inside her, a reminder of why she was doing this. Not to reclaim a past, but to protect a future. Transportation was arranged carefully. Mama Nomza insisted on accompanying her part of the way, waiting nearby in case she was needed. Dr. Abena would arrive separately. As the car approached the wedding venue, Adaze's pulse quickened, not with panic but with resolve. She could hear music even from a distance. Laughter, applause. The world inside that hall believed it was celebrating closure. Adaze knew better. She stepped out of the car, slowly adjusting her posture, her breathing steady. She placed one hand over her belly, grounding herself in the present. At the entrance, security guards glanced at her uncertainly. One stepped forward. "Madam, this is a private event," he said politely. Adaze nodded. "I know," she replied. "I won't be long." She did not push. She did not argue. She simply stood. From inside the hall, the music swelled. Adai's waited calm as stone. The moment was no longer approaching. It had arrived. Adaeze Chukwu did not enter the wedding hall that day. Not yet. As the music rose and fell behind the tall glass doors, she turned away quietly and walked back toward the waiting car. The security guards watched her leave, confused but relieved. Inside, vows would be rehearsed. Guests would settle into their seats and no one would notice the woman who had stood at the threshold and chosen restraint. It was not fear that made Adaeze step back. It was wisdom. By the time she reached Mama Nomza Kumalo's house again, a sharp pain gripped her lower back. She paused, breathing carefully, one hand pressing against her belly. The twins shifted restlessly, their movements, sudden and strong. Adaeze felt a cold certainty settle over her. Something was wrong. Within an hour, the pain intensified. It came in waves, tightening, releasing, tightening again. Mama Nomza did not hesitate. She called Dr. Abena Owusu immediately, her voice firm and urgent. "She's contracting," Mama Nomza said. Too early. The drive to the hospital blurred into flashes of traffic lights and sirens. Adaeze focused on her breathing, on staying calm, on keeping the babies safe. Fear threatened to overwhelm her, but she held it back with determination. At the hospital, nurses moved quickly. Adaeze was rushed into a delivery room as Dr. Abena arrived, her expression serious but controlled. "You're in preterm labor," Dr. Abena said. "We'll do everything we can." The hours that followed tested every strength Adaeze had left. Pain tore through her body, relentless and unforgiving. Sweat soaked her clothes. Her hands clenched the sheets until her fingers cramped. She cried out, not from weakness, but from effort, from the raw struggle of holding on. Mama Nomza stayed by her side, murmuring encouragement. Dr. Abena guided the team with steady authority, adjusting medications, monitoring heartbeats, making decisions in moments that felt both endless and fleeting. Between contractions, Adaeze drifted in and out of awareness. In those fragile spaces, memories surfaced uninvited. The day she married Ismaila Tanko, the quiet nights of prayer, the door closing behind her, the moment she learned the truth. She had been denied. "Stay with us," Dr. Abena urged gently. "Focus on me." Adaeze nodded weakly. She forced her eyes open. "They have to live," she whispered. "Please." Dr. Abena met her gaze. "We are fighting for them," she said, "and so are you." The first baby arrived just before dawn. He was small. Too small. His cry was faint but unmistakable. A thin sound that sliced through the room like light. A nurse moved quickly, carrying him to a warmer, checking vital signs with practiced urgency. Zuberi Adaeze whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. She did not know how she knew his name in that moment. She only knew it was right. Moments later, the second baby followed. Zain arrived quieter, his tiny chest rising and falling unevenly. Adaeze's heart lurched as nurses worked swiftly around him. Oxygen masks, gentle hands whispered instructions. The room held its breath. Then Zain cried. Not loudly, not strongly, but enough. Adaeze sobbed openly, then relief and exhaustion colliding inside her. Mama Nomza wept beside her, her usually steady voice breaking as she whispered prayers of gratitude. The twins were taken to the neonatal unit immediately. Adaeze barely had time to see their faces, small, fragile, undeniably alive, before they were wheeled away. She lay back against the pillows, drained beyond words. Hours later, as daylight filled the hospital windows, Dr. Abena returned with cautious optimism. "They're stable," she said. "They'll need time and care, but they're fighters." Adaeze closed her eyes, tears slipping silently down her temples. "Thank you," she whispered. Recovery was slow. Adaeze's body felt hollowed out, as though everything she had was now outside her. She spent long hours in the neonatal unit sitting quietly beside the incubators watching the steady rise and fall of her sons' chests. She spoke to them softly, telling them stories of strength and survival of a mother who would never abandon them. She promised them safety, not certainty, but effort. News of the early birth spread quietly among those who knew Adaez. Mama Nomza informed a few trusted friends. Dr. Abena ensured confidentiality, but in a city woven tightly by rumor secrets, rarely stayed contained. By evening, messages began to arrive. Distant relatives expressed surprise, concern, curiosity. None asked permission. All wanted answers. Adaez ignored them. Her focus narrowed to the two small lives depending on her presence. Each beep of a monitor, each gentle movement from within the incubators mattered more than any explanation she could give the world. On the second day after the birth, Adaez received a message she did not expect. It was from Safia Bello. The text was brief, tentative. "I heard you are in the hospital. I hope you are well." Adaez stared at the screen for a long time. There was no accusation in the words, no hostility, just uncertainty. She did not reply. Not yet. That evening, Dr. Abena sat with Adaez, reviewing recovery plans and next steps. When the practicalities were covered, the doctor paused. "You know this changes things," she said gently. "People will talk. They already are." Adaez nodded. "I know. Are you ready?" Dr. Abena asked. Adaez looked through the glass at her sons, their tiny hands curled into fists, their faces peaceful, despite the machines around them. "No," she said honestly. "But I'm no longer afraid." The next morning, a nurse mentioned casually that there had been calls asking about Adaez's status. Some callers claimed to be family. Others did not identify themselves at all. Mama Nomsa's expression hardened when she heard. "They are trying to get ahead of the truth," she said. "Before it reaches them." Adaez understood. The birth of Zuberi and Zain had done something she had not fully anticipated. It had shifted the timeline. The truth was no longer approaching at her pace, it was advancing on its own. Late that night, Adaez sat alone in the hospital chapel, the quiet wrapping around her like a shield. She prayed not for revenge, not for validation, but for clarity. When she returned to the neonatal unit, she made her decision. She would not hide anymore. Not recklessly, not angrily, but deliberately. She would wait until her sons were stronger, until she could stand without trembling, until the truth could be spoken without breaking her. The wedding she had turned away from was already over. Vows had been exchanged. Applause had filled the hall. Photos had been taken. And yet, Adaez felt no urgency to interrupt that narrative immediately. Because the truth had its own timing. And now it had witnesses. Zuberi stirred in his incubator, his tiny fingers stretching as if reaching for something unseen. Zain followed his movements, slower but determined. Adaez pressed her hand, gently against the glass. "I'm here," she whispered. "And when the time comes, I won't be silent." The chapter she had survived was closing. Another, far more dangerous to lies, was about to begin. The days after Zuberi and Zain were born moved at an unfamiliar pace, slow in hours, relentless in consequence. Adaeze Chukwu learned to measure time by heartbeats on monitors, by milliliters of milk expressed and labeled by the smallest signs of progress that meant everything. Each morning she washed her hands, carefully stood beside the incubators and whispered her sons' names as if anchoring them to the world. They responded in their own quiet ways. Zuberi's grip grew firmer. Zain's breathing steadied. The doctors spoke cautiously, never promising too much, but their optimism was unmistakable. Adaez held on to that optimism like a thread. Outside the neonatal unit, life continued to rearrange itself around her story. Messages multiplied. Some were kind, others were curious, a few were veiled warnings. Adaez read none of them beyond the first line. Mama Nomsa Kumalo filtered calls and visitors with the authority of someone who had learned long ago that boundaries were a form of love. Dr. Abena Owusu remained a steady presence, clinical, when needed, compassionate, always. During one quiet afternoon review, she laid out a careful plan, medical follow-ups, timelines for the twins' release precautions Adaz would need to take once they were home. Then gently, she asked the question that had been hovering between them for weeks. What happens next? Adaz did not answer immediately. She watched her sons through the glass, their chests rising and falling in a rhythm that felt miraculous. What needs to happen, she said finally. But not all at once. The wedding of Ismaila Tanko and Safia Bello had concluded 2 days earlier. Photos flooded social media, smiles framed by flowers, hands raised in celebration, captions praising new beginnings. Adaeze did not look at them. She did not need to. The noise of celebration could not reach the quiet clarity she had found here. Still, the marriage changed the stakes. With Ismaila officially remarried, the lie that had ended Adaeze's marriage was no longer just a personal injustice. It had become a public foundation. The longer it stood unchallenged, the more people it would hurt, most immediately her sons. One evening, Adaeze asked Mama Nomsa to bring her the file. They sat together at a small table in the hospital's family lounge. The file lay between them, thick and orderly, its contents the sum of months of preparation. Medical reports, signed statements, timelines, notes written in Adaeze's careful hand. Mama Nomsa looked at her quietly. "Are you ready to decide?" she asked. Adaeze took a breath. "I am ready to plan," she said, "not to explode." They went through the documents together, identifying what mattered most and what could wait. Dr. Abena joined them later, adding clarity where medical language needed translation into plain truth. They discussed risks, responses, and outcomes, not emotionally, but strategically. Adaeze listened, asked questions, took notes. She had learned something vital. During the months of silence, truth without structure could be dismissed. Truth, delivered with care, demanded attention. The next morning, Adaeze received a message she could not ignore. It was from Safia Bello. "I don't know how to ask this." Without sounding intrusive, the message began. "But I heard you gave birth. I was told things that don't add up. If you're willing, I would like to understand." Adaeze stared at the screen for a long time. This was the moment she had anticipated, feared, rehearsed. She felt no triumph, only a steady sense of responsibility. She replied simply, "I'm in the hospital. My children are still in care. If you want to talk, we can do so when I'm discharged. I won't explain myself in fragments." The response came quickly. "Thank you for replying. I'll wait." Adaeze set the phone down and exhaled. The first door had opened, not with force but with consent. Over the next days, the twins continued to strengthen. Adaeze's own recovery progressed more slowly, but steadily. She walked the hospital corridors with growing confidence, no longer hunched beneath the weight of secrecy. Nurses greeted her by name. Doctors updated her directly. She felt seen, not as a problem, but as a mother. On the fourth day, Dr. Abena shared new information that solidified Adaeze's resolve. A colleague at a diagnostic center had confirmed what Dr. Abena suspected. Ismaila Tanko had once been advised to undergo fertility testing during a routine medical check years earlier. The recommendation was documented. It had never been followed. The omission was not proof, but it was pattern. Adaeze absorbed the information quietly. She did not smile. She did not react outwardly at all. Inside, something settled into place. The narrative that had destroyed her marriage had never been examined, because it had never needed to be. Blame had been easy. Silence had been convenient. That convenience would end. When the twins were moved from incubators to cots, Adaeze felt a surge of gratitude that nearly brought her to her knees. She held them, first Zuberi, then Zain, feeling their warmth, their weight. the undeniable reality of them. These were not arguments. These were lives. That night she wrote a letter, not to Ismaila, not to his family, but to herself. She wrote about the woman she had been when she believed endurance was the same as love. She wrote about the cost of silence. She wrote about the future she wanted for her sons, one where truth was not feared and dignity was not conditional. When she finished, she folded the letter and placed it in the file. 2 days later, Ades was discharged. Mama Nomza brought the car around while Dr. Abena ensured everything was arranged for follow-up care. As Adaise stepped outside with her sons bundled carefully against her chest, she felt the air differently. The world seemed sharper, more demanding, but also more open. Back at Mama Nomza's house, the women gathered quietly to welcome the twins. There was no celebration, no announcements, just hands helping meals prepared, space made. That evening, Adaise sent one more message. This time it was to Ismaila Tanko. I have given birth to twins. They are healthy and receiving care. I am not contacting you to accuse or reconcile. I am informing you because the truth will not remain hidden. When you are ready to speak honestly, you know where to find me. She did not wait for a reply. The next morning, Adaise scheduled a meeting with a legal advisor recommended by Dr. Abena's network, not to file a case immediately, to understand options, to ensure that whatever came next, she and her children would be protected. The advisor listened carefully, reviewed the documents and nodded. You've done the hardest part already, she said. You prepared. As Adaise returned home that day, Zuberi sleeping against her shoulder, and Zain curled peacefully in his carrier, she felt something she had not felt in years. Control, not over others, not over outcomes, over herself. The truth was no longer a weight she carried alone. It had shape, support, witnesses. Adaise stood at the threshold of a new chapter 1 where she would not be dragged into the light unwillingly but would step forward on her own terms. And when she did, she would not be asking anyone to believe her. She would be showing them. The day Adaise Chukwu chose to return to the wedding venue, the city had already moved on. The music had stopped. The chairs had been stacked away. Flower petals lay crushed into the ground outside the hall, their bright colors dulled by footsteps and time. Vendors dismantled temporary stalls. Drivers argued over unpaid balances. What had been celebrated as a perfect beginning was now just another completed event. Adaise arrived quietly, not to disrupt a ceremony but to confront its aftermath. She did not come alone. Zuberi and Zain were settled securely in their carriers, sleeping after a morning feeding. Mama Nomsa Kumalo walked beside her, steady and watchful. Dr. Abena Owusu waited nearby, arriving separately as planned. No crowd followed them. No drama announced their presence. The timing was deliberate. Inside the venue, a smaller gathering remained. Close family members, elders, and a few guests who had stayed behind for post-wedding rituals. Ismaila Tanko was there, his suit jacket loosened, his posture relaxed in the relief of having crossed a finish line. Safia Bello stood near him, smiling politely as she spoke with relatives. Laughter filled the space until the doors opened. Adaise stepped inside without hesitation. Her presence did not register immediately. Then someone noticed the babies. Then someone recognized her face. The shift was instant. Conversations stalled, heads turned, whispers rippled through the room, like wind across dry grass. Ismaila's smile faltered as recognition dawned. His body stiffened as if bracing for impact. Safia noticed the change before she saw the cause. She followed his gaze and froze. Adaise did not raise her voice. She did not demand attention. She simply walked forward and stopped at a respectful distance, her posture straight, her expression calm. I'm not here to cause a scene, she said clearly. I'm here to correct a lie, Silence fell heavily. Hajia Zainab Tanko stood abruptly. "This is inappropriate," she snapped. "You have no right, I have every right," Adayez replied evenly. "This concerns my body, my marriage, and my children." At the word children, the room stirred. Safia's eyes dropped involuntarily to the carriers. Her breath caught. Ismaila's mouth opened, then closed. He looked suddenly smaller than Adayze remembered. Adayze continued, her voice steady. "I was sent away from this family because I was labeled Barren. That label was never proven. It was assumed, and it destroyed my marriage." She turned slightly toward the elders, seated nearby. "I respected your customs. I accepted blame I did not earn. I left without protest." She paused, not for effect, but for breath. "These are my sons," she said softly. "Zubair and Zain." The names settled into the room. Safia took a step forward before she could stop herself. "You said you wanted to talk," she whispered, eyes wide with confusion. "Is this what you meant?" Adaz met her gaze, compassion clear but unyielding. "I meant truth," she said. "Not fragments, not rumors." She reached into her bag and removed the document file. She did not wave it. She did not shove it forward. She placed it gently on a nearby table. "These are my medical records," Adaiz said, "from before and after my divorce. They show that I was never medically infertile." A murmur spread through the room. Hajia Zainab shook her head sharply. "Lies," she said. "Documents can be arranged." Dr. Abena stepped forward, then calm and authoritative. "I'm Dr. Abena Owusu," she said. "I conducted the assessments myself. These records are verified. Anyone here may review them." The murmuring grew louder. Ismaila's face drained of color. "Adaize," he said hoarsely, "this isn't the place." "There was never a place for me to speak," Adaize replied. "That's why I was silent. Until now." She turned to Ismaila fully. "You refused testing. You allowed blame to settle on me because it protected you. And you let your family believe a lie because it was convenient." Ismaila's eyes darted to the elders, to Safia, to his mother. "I didn't know," he said weakly. "I thought you thought what benefited you," Adaize said gently. "And I paid the price." Safia stepped back as if struck. "You told me she couldn't have children," she said to Ismaila, her voice trembling. "You told me everything had been medically confirmed." Ismaila said nothing. That silence answered more clearly than any confession. Safia's composure cracked. "So I was chosen to fix a lie," she said. "To erase a woman you were too afraid to defend." No one responded. Adaiz looked at Safia with sincerity. "I didn't come to take your place," she said. "I came to reclaim my name." The elders shifted uneasily. One cleared his throat. "This is serious," he said. "If what you say is true." "It is," Dr. Abena replied calmly. Hajia Zainab's voice rose sharp with desperation. "This woman wants to shame us!" Adaiz turned to her, eyes steady. "No," she said. "The shame came from lies. I brought truth." She picked up her son's carriers, slightly grounding herself. "I'm not asking for reconciliation. I'm not asking for apology. I'm asking for acknowledgement that I was wronged." Ismaila finally spoke again, his voice barely audible. "I'm sorry." The words fell flat. Adaiz studied him for a long moment. "I accept that you regret being exposed," she said quietly. "That is not the same as remorse." Safia covered her mouth, tears filling her eyes. She looked from Adaize to Ismaila, then back again. "I need time," she whispered. "I don't know who I married." Adaiz nodded. "Neither did I." She turned to leave. As she did, one of the elders spoke. "Your truth has been heard," he said solemnly. "It cannot be undone." Adaiz paused at the doorway, her back straight, her son's close to her heart. "That's all I came for," she said. Outside, the air felt lighter. Mama Nomsa exhaled slowly beside her. Dr. Abena placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Inside the hall, questions erupted. Arguments followed. Foundations cracked. But Adez did not wait to witness the collapse. She walked away, not in triumph, not in bitterness, but in dignity, knowing that for the first time the story told about her would no longer begin with blame. It would begin with truth. The aftermath did not wait politely behind closed doors. Inside the wedding hall, the silence Adaz left behind shattered almost immediately. Voices rose. Chairs scraped against the floor. Elders argued in sharp, controlled tones that barely concealed panic. What had been a celebration, hours earlier, was now a courtroom without a judge, filled with evidence. No one could pretend not to see. Ismaila Tanko stood frozen at the center of it all. For the first time in his adult life, there was no family member willing or able to speak for him. The lie that had protected him for years had collapsed under its own weight, and everyone could see the debris. Safia Bello was the first to move. She walked away from the cluster of women whispering near the wall and stood directly in front of Ismaila. Her voice was quiet, but every word cut through the noise. "You told me your marriage ended because your wife couldn't have children," she said. "You told me doctors confirmed it." Ismaila swallowed. "I believed it," he said weakly. "That's what everyone said." Safia shook her head slowly. "Belief is not truth," she replied. "And you never checked." She turned to the elders, her composure fraying but intact. "I married into this family, believing I was stepping into honesty. I was not informed that my marriage was built on another woman's silence." Hajia Zainab Tanko tried to regain control. "Safia, this is not, please Safia," interrupted her voice trembling now. "Do not explain this away." The elders exchanged uneasy glances. One of them reached for the file Adez had placed on the table and began to read carefully. Others followed. The murmurs grew louder, more urgent. "This is signed," one elder said. "Stamped and verified," another added. The reality settled in like dust after a collapse. Alhaji Musa Tanko cleared his throat, his earlier confidence gone. "These things happen," he said cautiously. "Mistakes are made." "No," Safia said sharply. "Choices were made." Ismaila felt something break, then not dramatically. Not with tears, but with a hollow sensation spreading through his chest. He had told himself the lie long enough that it had become truth in his own mind. Now stripped of witnesses, willing to protect it, he saw himself clearly. A man who chose comfort over courage, a man who sacrificed another person's dignity to preserve his own. His knees weakened. He reached for a chair and sat down heavily, his head in his hands. "I didn't think it would come to this," he whispered. Hajia Zainab's voice rose again, desperate now. "This woman came to destroy us," she insisted. "She planned this." No one of the elders said firmly. "She came prepared." "There is a difference." The words landed with finality. Safia stepped back, her hands shaking. "I cannot continue like this," she said. "Not without understanding who I married." Ismaila looked up at her, panic flooding his eyes. "Safia, please." She shook her head. "Not now," she said. "Not until I know the full truth." Around them, the room fractured into arguments and stunned silence. Some relatives defended the family name. Others questioned everything they had accepted without proof. Phones came out. Messages were typed and erased. News traveled fast. Outside the hall, people gathered. Someone had recognized Adaz. Someone else had recorded part of the exchange. Within minutes, whispers turned into speculation. By evening, the story had moved beyond the venue, circulating through messages, group chats, quiet phone calls. Adazi Chukwu's name, once spoken with pity and blame, now carried a different weight. Back at Mama Nomsa Kumalo's house, Adaez sat with her sons resting against her chest. She felt the tremor in her hands finally subside. The confrontation had taken more from her than she expected. Not strength, but energy. Truth, she realized, demanded endurance. Dr. Abena Owusu called later that evening. "You did well," she said simply. "Whatever happens next, you controlled your narrative." Adaez nodded, though the doctor could not see her. "That was all I wanted," she replied. Meanwhile, the consequences deepened. Safia Bello left the family house that night and returned to her parents. She did not announce anything publicly, but her absence spoke volumes. Questions followed her. She answered none. Ismaila remained behind, isolated. The elders met privately and confronted him directly. There was no shouting, no ceremony, just the slow dismantling of excuses. "You allowed a lie to stand," one elder said. "You benefited from it." Ismaila could not deny it. Hajia Zainab tried once more to shift blame. If Adaezi had spoken earlier, she was silenced, an elder replied. "By all of you." The words settled heavily. By morning, the family's reputation had shifted. Not destroyed, but altered. People spoke more carefully now. Where they once repeated a simple story, they now hesitated, unsure which parts had been true. Ismaila reached for his phone again and again, drafting messages to Adaezi he never sent. What could he say? That he was sorry, that he hadn't meant to ruin her life. The words felt insufficient, almost insulting. When he finally wrote, it was brief. "I know an apology cannot fix this, but I am ashamed. I was wrong." The message remained unread for hours. Adaeze did not rush to respond. She read it later. Once, then set the phone aside. She felt no satisfaction, no urge to retaliate. Just a quiet confirmation that she had done what she needed to do. That evening, as she rocked Zuberi and Zain to sleep, Adaeze reflected on the strange shape justice had taken. It had not arrived with punishment or revenge. It had arrived with exposure. The lie had been revealed. The blame had shifted. The silence had ended. And yet she felt no triumph. What she felt instead was release. The next day, a representative from the elders visited Mama Nomsa's house. He spoke respectfully, carefully. "The family acknowledges that you were wronged," he said. "This will be addressed." Adaeze listened without emotion. "Acknowledgement is enough," she replied. "I am not seeking restitution." The man nodded, relieved. As he left, Mama Nomsa smiled softly. "You ended a cycle," she said. "That matters." In the days that followed, the story continued to evolve. Some defended Ismaila, others condemned him. Opinions shifted, fragmented. Adaez did not engage. She did not need consensus to validate truth. Safia sent one final message. "I'm sorry for the role I played without knowing it. I hope you and your children find peace." Adaez replied simply, "I hope you do too." As the noise gradually faded, Adaez felt the ground beneath her steady. The confrontation she had prepared for months had passed. What remained was the work of living, raising her sons, rebuilding her future, protecting the dignity she had reclaimed. The climax had come and gone. The truth had stood. And now the final chapter awaited, not to prove anything further, but to show what healing looked like after justice had spoken. In the weeks that followed the collapse of the lie, Adaeze Chukwu's life grew quieter, not empty but intentional. The city moved on as cities always did. New scandals replaced old ones. Conversations shifted. Names that once carried weight faded into background noise. But beneath that surface movement, something permanent had changed. The story people told about Adaeze no longer began with failure. It began with truth. She did not return to the Tanko family house. She did not attend meetings meant to resolve matters. She did not accept invitations framed as reconciliation. Adaeze understood something clearly. Now, closure did not require proximity to those who had broken her. Her days centered around Zubair and Zain. Motherhood arrived without drama, without applause, just responsibility. The twins woke often at night, their cries sharp and demanding. Adays learned their rhythms, their differences. Zubair was restless, quick to protest discomfort. Zain was quieter, observant even as an infant. Holding them grounded her in the present in a way nothing else could. Mama Nomza Kumulo remained a constant presence, offering support without intrusion. She taught Adazy practical lessons: how to rest without guilt, how to accept help without shame, how to set boundaries without explanation. You don't owe people access to you, Mama Nomza reminded her, especially not after they've proven they don't know how to care for what they touch. Adays took those words seriously. She returned to work, gradually choosing flexibility over ambition. She continued her certification course, studying late into the night when the twins slept. Each small achievement rebuilt her confidence, not as a wife, not as someone's discarded past, but as a capable woman shaping her own future. The Tanko family's response unfolded at a distance. Ismaila Tanko tried more than once to see her. He sent messages asking for conversation, for forgiveness, for a chance to explain. Adays read them without anger, without hope. She did not reply. Eventually she sent one message, brief, precise. I accept that you regret your choices. I do not accept responsibility for them. My focus is my children and my life. Please respect that. Ismaila did not respond again. Safia Bello's path diverged quietly. The marriage, though legally intact, was no longer whole. She remained with her parents, reconsidering everything she had stepped into unknowingly. Adazy heard of this through others, but did not involve herself. Safia's healing was her own journey. What mattered was what Adays chose to do with the truth. Now that it had been spoken, she did not become a public figure. She did not give interviews. She did not build her identity around victimhood or vindication. Instead, she found purpose in something smaller, deeper. Through Mama Nomsa's connections, Adays began volunteering once a week at a women's clinic, helping organize records, guiding new patients through processes that once terrified her. She listened more than she spoke. When women shared stories of blame and silence, Adays did not interrupt. She simply nodded, offering presence rather than solutions. Sometimes that was enough. Other times she shared a single sentence. You are allowed to ask questions. The impact surprised her. Women returned seeking advice, not legal, not medical, but emotional. How to speak without fear, how to stand firm without becoming bitter, how to survive shame long enough to outgrow it. Adays never positioned herself as an expert. She was still learning, still healing, but she understood something vital now: that silence once broken could create space for others to breathe. At home, evenings were filled with ordinary miracles. Zubair's first smile, Zain's curious gaze following shadows across the wall, the weight of their bodies against her chest as they slept. Adays sometimes wondered who she might have become if her marriage had not ended in cruelty. The thought no longer haunted her. That woman had existed. She had loved sincerely, and she had survived. That was enough. One afternoon, months later, Adays received a letter. Not an apology, not a demand, but a formal acknowledgement from a community council affiliated with the Tanko elders. It stated clearly that Adaeze Chukwu had been wrongfully blamed and that public assumptions about her fertility were unfounded. The letter carried no flourish, no drama. Adaeze read it once, folded it neatly, and placed it in a drawer. She did not frame it. Her dignity no longer required documentation. As the twins grew stronger, Adays moved into a small apartment of her own. Nothing extravagant, just space, light, peace. She decorated slowly, choosing items that felt meaningful rather than impressive. One evening, as she watched Zubair and Zain sleeping side by side, Adazy reflected on the journey she had taken from silence to voice, from blame to truth, from survival to intention. She had not won a battle. She had reclaimed herself, and that reclamation changed everything. Adais knew there would be challenges ahead. Questions her sons would one day ask. Conversations she would have to navigate carefully. A world that still judged women more harshly than men. But she also knew this: her children would grow up seeing a woman who did not disappear when blamed, who did not break when silenced, who chose integrity over approval. That would be her legacy. On a quiet Sunday morning, Adais took the twins for a walk, sunlight filtering through trees overhead. Neighbors greeted her warmly. Some recognized her story, others did not. Both were fine. As she walked, Adais felt something settle inside her. Not closure, not triumph, but alignment. Her life was no longer shaped by what had been taken from her. It was shaped by what she chose to build. And in that choice she found not just justice, but peace.
Life does not always break us in loud, dramatic ways. Sometimes it breaks us quietly. Through blame, we did not earn silence. We were forced to carry truths that were buried because they were inconvenient. Adais's journey reminds us that injustice often survives, not because it is strong, but because it is accepted. And healing begins the moment we stop accepting what was never ours to bear. This story is not about revenge. It is about dignity. About a woman who chose truth over bitterness, boundaries over resentment, and purpose over pain. Adais did not reclaim her life by destroying others. She reclaimed it by refusing to disappear. She showed us that forgiveness does not mean returning to what broke you, and strength does not always shout. Sometimes strength stands quietly, holding its ground. For anyone who has been blamed unfairly, silenced by tradition, or made to feel small for circumstances beyond their control. This story is a reminder: your worth is not decided by public opinion, family pressure, or incomplete truths. You are allowed to ask questions, you are allowed to protect your peace, and you are allowed to walk away with your dignity intact. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments. What part resonated with your own life? Your voice matters, and someone else reading may need it more than you realize. And if you believe stories of healing, justice, and human resilience deserve to be told, subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing journeys that remind us we are not alone.